Hello, listeners of the future. Hello, everyone. Hello, rollers, and welcome back to another wonderful episode of Classing Up the Joint. I am your host, Colin. I use they and he pronouns, and I am so excited and overjoyed to be with another fantastic guest to talk about a really cool new game, and of course, ask the very important questions. Fantastic guest, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hello, my name's James Quigley. I'm a digital and tabletop game designer. I work full-time at Iron Galaxy Studios on some of your favorite AAA games, and in my spare time, I freelance and do projects over here in the tabletop sphere.
Amazing. James and I have gotten to work on a couple projects together here and there, some of which might even see the light of day this year, we hope. James, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited. So we're going to get into the meat of it, but will you give us the little tease about Prequel? And then I want to ask you a couple questions before we dive into the game itself. But Prequel is coming up. Kickstarter is going live like right now as we speak. What's the deal?
For sure.
What's the elevator pitch?
Yeah. The best way I like to say it, so Prequel is a boss fight history building game where you play as doomed heroes kind of fighting their final foe. So it's like, 50% this cool tactical combat, 50% this like really awesome like world building. And by the end, you get a prequel that you can turn into a long-term campaign.
Amazing. I'm so excited to get into it because I think this is something. I think the one thing I want to say about it, like it's something that can be lacking in longer form RPGs. Like to take our classic D&D, it's not something that's always given a lot of thought. Is how did your characters arrive at this point? What has happened before you? I think thoughtful DMs who want to create a lot of backstory and some pre-made campaigns have that, but it's not. It's the exception rather than the rule. I'm really excited to talk about Prequel and fill that niche. But the question I've been asking almost everyone first is, how did you get started in D&D or in RPGs generally? Was there like a specific game that grabbed you, a specific moment in time, and why?
For sure. Back in elementary school, we would play this thing that we called bullshit D&D.
Nice.
At recess or in the cafeteria. I didn't know what the D&D stood for. I just knew we would like kind of play this game of like weird, wacky adventures where one person would kind of, officiate, and they would roll their hand under the lunch table from, thumb to pinky. And you would say stop when you wanted them to stop, and they would pull out what finger they had, with, thumb being the best result history could possibly ever imagine, and, pinky being the most horrible, mistake that, falling down 50 flights of stairs, almost like, newspaper comic style.
Yeah.
That's where I got started. And it wasn't until later that I actually realized, there was a larger game and spear behind that.
Yeah. So mechanically, is the person like, they're like kind of closing and opening their fingers until you go back and then you say stop I love that.
Yeah, they're just kind of like rolling it. Now there's like
that's such a great mechanic.
Now there's the question. It's like you never saw where their hand was, so there's always the question of like, hey, like, do they like, where is it landing? Like, are they on the edge? But yeah, that's that's where we started off with.
I love that, like, there was clearly enough trust between y'all that you weren't gonna be like, hey, that's bullshit. I know you were holding out your thumb, not your pinky. And my own experience has been like trying to do an improvised bullshit D&D on the spot late at night at a festival, where I would just say, roll a thing. What did you roll? And no one has any dice. No one rolled above double digits in like a 40-minute bullshitting session, and I think people are excited by the imagination of low rolls.
Well, the funny thing is, like, we also, the hand determined everything. When you started off, like, one, like you got to choose your class and choose your race, but like it could be whatever class or race you came up with, and we just like rolled with it. Like, so people throwing in races from like World of Warcraft, from like different books or whatever, you know, just going on, and we had to roll with it. And then you got to roll for both like what your starting equipment was, and like where your starting location was. So like you would end up just like in a random place in the world with like either, you know, the best equipment that we could possibly imagine or the worst, and we would you'd go from there.
So this does beg the question for me, if like, have you thought about codifying and writing this? Because it sounds like a great game, honestly. A little bit of trust involved in everyone playing, and like knowing that you're gonna be honest with the finger system, but like, I love this so much.
I think a lot of what made that game fun was maybe some of like what made a game fun to a bunch of like, you know, 12-year-old boys.
Fair enough.
So I don't think I'd go on the edge of codifying it, but I do like, you know, very much the spirit of like, hey, like, you know, we no reference point whatever to just what our, you know, impromptu random you know, dice, for lack of a better word, decided, and we were just kind of, you know, we would go from, over the course of 3 hours, you always go from a literal like beggar with no name to like killing gods.
Yep. As one is wont to do. How did you get from that to an official game with dice and a rule book?
Yeah.
Did it, and I guess, what was the first one? Was it D&D?
What's up? 5th edition was the first TTRPG I played. Coming from that, it was you know, you get to the point where it's like, oh, this is so cool, and it was back in, you know, 2015, 2016, where, you know, actual play was just starting online, so you could actually watch what was happening, and like, oh, this is so cool. We had in one of my clubs at school, it was kind of a tradition that whoever was kind of like heading one of the like teams on this club, so like this was like a robotics club, so like I was, you know, senior year head of like my programming team. It's like you have to organize some type of team building activity. So I'm like, oh, cool. Easy. Yeah, I can now conscript, you know, the random assortment of underclassmen that are in my team to play D&D. The unfortunate thing is, like, as we started like talking about it, and, you know, the other people were getting excited, more and more people in the robotics team started like coming up. It's like, hey, what are you talking about? Like, oh, that's cool. Can I join in? And I'm like,
you're like, oh, suddenly you have a party of 10.
Yeah, we kept going. Yeah, and that leads me to my first session is me DMing a group of 13 people, you know, 70% of them who had never played before. So
Yep. I mean, major props for hurling yourself into the deep end very, very far with something like that. Amazing. How long did that game last?
That campaign is still ongoing.
See,
we're coming up on 10 years.
I'm assuming you're down to like 5. We've got
like a core cast of like 6. And then we've got, you know, a few people that maybe will like rotate into like, you know, update their character and see what they're up to, you know, once a season.
Yeah. Cool. Have you DM'd the whole time? Has it been a continuous campaign, sort of like maybe characters retire and you bring the next generation into the same world the whole game?
Yeah, it's been a continuous campaign.
Wow.
What's it called?
Oh, I love that. I find that really inspiring. Like, I know, you know, I've referenced a couple times the longest running game in the world that Wired did a story on. This guy in like Canada who's been going for 40 years, and the same idea. It's one world that keeps going, and every generation, every party is like the next generation of adventurers or the children of the previous group or that kind of thing. I think that's really, really cool to be able to keep it going for that long and maintain the story and kind of for lack of a better word, I think sometimes I think comics suffer from, you imagine the perspective of the normal person, like, Jesus Christ, yet another alien invasion, yet another supervillain, yet another whatever. And in a D&D realm, you might be like, oh my God, the Demogorgon is back again.
Yeah.
Can't they fucking take care of this guy? But yeah, keep it going for 10 years is really cool. And so I also want to ask the kind of the transition from like head of a robotics club to working full time for a games company.
Yeah, for sure.
And if that was kind of something that you wanted to do early on, and I don't know, I think not knowing you super, super well, I'm picking up a like robotics vibe on the one hand, and like, but yet I have parlayed my interest in stories into a career on the other hand kind of vibe.
Yeah, I think I'm a weird bird. Granted, I think I'm a bird that will get less weird as time goes on. Where you know, I was someone who, being in middle school and high school in like the 2010s, video games were already becoming such a big thing, and just from the 90s to 2010s, like the leaps and bounds of fidelity and like this turning into like such an industry was that like like at that point I was able to very directly set my sights of like, no, I think like this is what I want to do. I always had a great love of technology. I always had a great love of storytelling, and I'm like, what's like the Goldilocks zone where I can do awesome storytelling and also pursue technology, and like digital video games was like really like, okay, like it's the intersection, so we'll shoot for it.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's really interesting. Like I'm I guess kind of one generation previous to that. Like my middle and high school was late 90s, early 2000s, and it was just as like playing games with friends was not the one social subgroup off here in the corner doing that. It was much more widespread. I was seeing people in my class being like, yeah, we're going to go play Halo together. And I think, it was about that time. And like for like Halo 1 was like the biggest thing. But yeah, I also, as someone with an interest in storytelling, like it's so exciting to see that this is what's becoming cool, Yeah. I have so many questions to think of. What are I guess like some of the things? Tell me about some of the things that you have managed to create this far. Like, are there things that you are? I guess maybe two-part question to be more specific. Part one, is there something you've worked on that you are like, that was the one so far. I love it. I love everything about it. I'm so pleased to work on it. And part two, is there something that you feel that way about, but has maybe not gotten the same amount of like recognition that you're like, no, but I love this one and I want more people to be excited about it.
For sure. I'll speak in terms of like, babies that I feel like have, came out the best, so far. I think I'm definitely biased that because it's, my most, recent child, but back at literally like this time last year, I released my first, project on DM's Guild, which was a little supplement to go along with the new Planescape book that came out. So we I got a group of other like, new writers, people who are probably on like, their first to like third, self-published project, and we made a little book that has a bunch of planar magic items. So it's 2 magic items for every plane, and then we added a little basically underground magical market to the city of Sigil that masquerades as basically a union of a bunch of food street vendors.
That's incredible. I love that so much.
So it was really like, like one, like the blessing of getting to work with a lot of people who are very, passionate. I think the one thing you don't necessarily, hear about, but like it's been from like my experience that, as someone who like, oh, I want to make games and I want to do things for game development, I go to college for that, and I do a degree in game development. Awesome. Cool. The problem is like you have some people in those classes who like you have some people who are very focused about like, no, like I'm here to do this degree because I want to do this professionally and I want this to make this my living. And there are some other people who, they are at a different point in their life or a different point of their own discovery, but you get the attitude that they chose this coursework because like, oh, I just like playing games and, I know I have to go to college for something. So you can get a mismatch of attitudes versus some people who want to approach things with a real pro mentality versus, other people who are just kind of, there to, fill in their grades. Same with any major, right?
And any profession, honestly, I think once you are out of school, I've found a very similar sort of, there are in almost any given, especially remotely artistic profession, writing and game developing and visual art and performing, there's people that just kind of like have waltzed in because they think it's a good idea and they think they can do it, even if they have no actual training or background in it. And then there are other people that have done it for, they're 25 and you're like, oh, you've been doing this for 20 years already. You're 40. You've been doing this for 40 years and are really committed to it. And I don't know. The other thing I find in kind of my own profession is that sometimes the people that work the hardest might not have started with what you would call like a natural, innate, whatever gift for the XYZ. In my case, it's usually very physical, but they have busted their ass to become really good at the thing. And they put in way more work than the people that are naturally, innately excited about the thing, talented,
And well, I'll owe it like, I mean, looping back around, like, with this project, like, I everybody on this project was from different points in their life, different, some people who, maybe were later in their life had other careers and were now, looking towards tabletop, other people who are maybe like, younger, kind of like in or coming out of college, like my age, like, but like, we were all at the same experience level and we all took to the project with the same, level of, professionalism and, camaraderie and like seriousness and attitude.
Yeah.
And I think that's also like what made that project, such an enjoyment to work on is that everyone here is, was taking it seriously.
We have missed one important thing. What is the actual title of this? Because I'm like taking notes and there will be links. What is the actual title of this supplement?
So the supplement is called Sigil Secret Menu. So it is, the secret menu is all of the magic items that you get to pick from.
And it's tied to the food market. Oh, I love that.
What's this? Very
so
food,
cool.
very food themed. Each of the vendors also has a little, they have their own table of, D&D themed, street food that you can go and buy, and they all have their own little mini games. So it was a great project.
This is fantastic. And it's something that, again, like to highlight, it is filling a need. Like the officially released stuff on the City of Sigil is like also. Some people have been very, very forcefully saying it's Sigil, and some people are like, no, it's Sigil. And I'm like, okay, it's one of those two. But the actual established canonical Planescape book is like very, very light on what is actually there. It's just kind of, here's the factions, and here's a very rough geography, which is why I think it's so great that like a number of people have stepped in to try to fill this void, and some of whom seem to have like, huge attachment to the Planescape Torment game from the 90s and like where some of this lore was created. And some people are like, no, I'm seeing this need and I'm excited about filling this. Yeah. Super cool. Okay, so the part two of that is there something that you have worked on or built that you're like, this didn't get quite the love it deserved, but I was really happy with how it came out. I really love this idea.
I- I'll talk to like one of my like first self-published things, which was definitely like back in I'd say like 2018 now. I don't think it didn't get the love it deserved, but I'm still happy with what you know, what it tried to accomplish and do, which was, you know, like at college, I'm running my own, you know, weekly D&D campaign, also set in the same world as that first one, which opened some cool
when you have
moments.
built all this body of lore, like why not use it, you know? Yeah, totally.
I was running that campaign and kind of also like at that point starting to, you know, dip my toes into reading other games that weren't D&D. I kind of ran into kind of the point where it's like, hey, like other games don't give you experience by just like hacking monsters. You know, there are other games that like that like, oh, you're saying players get rewarded for like their experience and their characters grow based off of like what they choose and how they want to play their character out. Like it's not necessarily fully like gate kept by the GM. And I'm like, oh, I really like that idea of, yeah, like let's turn experience over to the players because like they're as much of a equal participant in the game as the GM. So why am I holding when you're going to have a level up, like, you know, cards to my chest, you know, like it's like, no, you'll get your level up, you know, when, you know, you get it based off of your own merits. So I designed a little goal-based advancement system for 5th edition where basically you get EXP based off of, you know, at the beginning of the session doing a little bit of, you know, journaling to yourself. I could be wrong on this. I believe it was largely based off of the experience system that's in Dogs in the Vineyard. But it's been a while, so I could be wrong on that. But, you know, you write a little character note to yourself. It's like, hey, this is what I want to try to accomplish this session. And if you accomplish it, you get some experience. If you don't, then you don't. But you also have like a longer term goal that will give you more. The fun thing on the other side, though, was when you succeed or fail on the goal, you get to write a little note to yourself in character of like what your character took away from this, you know?
That's so cool.
Like, it's like, oh, like I really want to find, you know, the demon that's like plaguing this village that we're hunting. Like, oh, like I succeed. It's like, yes, I'm actually really cool and demons are chumps. And I fail. I fail and I think to myself, like, it's a real cool option to like take your character and like maybe a weird way. It's like, I fail and it's like, oh, it's not that like demons are really hard. It's that, no, this demon is like taunting me. And like now I'm like, you know, you write it in like,
I'm going to make it personal.
Yeah, you write the voice and like your character's getting maybe a little paranoid.
Yeah.
That they can't find the demon.
When I appreciate it also, it offers a real chance. I think so often at the end of a session, you're just like, you know, DM closes their screen. You're like, cool, see you next week, see you in 2 weeks. And everyone just kind of like can disperse. And it requires, I would say, if you're really going to opt into it, it requires players to sit down and reflect for 5 or 10 minutes about what their character has done. And I would imagine it also kind of prompts some good role play in upcoming sessions because you have this list of goals and you know from the acting standpoint, you're like, I know what my character's goals are. I know what's my motivation and how I can respond to a new situation that's being put in front of me. And I do think that is It's not explicitly required within D&D, I would say. So like, it's, again, as someone who loves storytelling, I think that's a great mechanic to kind of foist on your players, to ask them to be reflective about their choices. Yeah. Cool. Well, I guess on that note, let's talk about Prequel, because that is kind of what we're here to talk about, and I am really excited. Walk me back to, like, where did this idea come from? Like, was it kind of seeing that lack of a real what has happened to start a campaign story? That I don't think that's unique to D&D. I think that is common to a lot of systems. But yeah, where did this come from?
That takes us back to last year, where, well, no, not last year, year before that. So in 2013, I think I was at a point where I was starting to looking to take tabletop more seriously. I kind of first compartmentalized, where I'm like, okay, I want to get my digital games job, so I have a salary and I can pay rent. That seems like a good first step. I had that together, and now I'm like, okay, now it's time to like go deeper into tabletop. And so I was just starting to like, look around on Twitter and try to look for conversations, and like, it's like, okay, like, who is in this space and who's talking about things. And I stumbled upon a design devlog for Prequel. Written by my co-developer on this project, Ethan Yen, where he was talking about, very like the game in like its first concept. So really, like, the initial like idea really goes to him of like, it's like, oh, like, what if you could play a game where, like, very much like that first introductory scene of Lord of the Rings, where it's, the armies in the fight that went against Sauron, before, like, that set everything up, like, how did the ring get to Bilbo? And you get to play that, like, how cool would it be to like start your campaign with that moment, instead of, just like, oh, we've all emerged out of the ether from, nothing. And I'm like, man, that's really cool.
We're all in a tavern for some reason. How do we get to the fucking tavern? Yeah.
And I thought that was a really cool idea. I also thought like a big premise of Prequel is that it's a play to lose game. You play as the characters who are going to die, and that's the assumption. There's not really a way out of it. And I, like, you very much, touched on this earlier. Like, my brain is like, 50% like, game lover and like 50% engineer, right? So like, the cranks start going in my brain. It's like, oh, well, what would we have to do to like make a game where you're going to lose fun? What mechanics and what levers would we have to pull to make that happen? And that, I started talking to Ethan in, just Twitter replies about it, and we had a little exchange. And then a month later, I accidentally ran into him at a convention, and I just said like, hey, like, those were cool. We talked on Twitter. Yeah. Okay, bye. It's like, oh, he's like,
it happens. Bye. It happens so often at cons. You're like, I have 30 seconds or less to make contact with this person, and I'm out. Yeah.
And it was the weird circumstance of, I was looking for people to like talk to and have informational interviews with about the industry and to learn more. And so someone I had an interview with actually was one of Ethan's mentors. And so after we had that call, he's like, hey, by the way, do you know Ethan? I said, yeah, we talked briefly. He's like, well, he wants your email because he wants to talk to you about possibly working on a game together. And I'm like, oh, cool. Awesome. Yeah, for sure. And that's how kind of I got into the Prequel, as, working on it and like putting my own hand on the lever.
Yeah. So that if I'm getting the timeline right, that sounds like about 5 14-ish months from like kind of initial Twitter conversations to now the game is ready and we're raising money for it. Is that a typical timeline in your experience so far? Or does that feel... That to me, that feels very vaguely typical of what I have gathered, but I have not like really taken something from initial idea to completed product ready for backers in the same way yet.
For sure. I think it's definitely the longest timeline I've worked on a project for. Like in terms of like, outside of just like, oh, this is a side thing I'm noodling on. But like in terms of like an actual like development timeline, it's definitely the longest. I'd say, from what I understand, that's fairly typical. Like from like, you get a project to a prototype, and then within a year and a half, you have something that's like pretty well put together that like you're either looking to turn into like a fully realized game, whether it be through a publisher or crowdfunding or something else.
Hello, rollers. Colin here. I'm going to take a moment from this amazing interview with James Quigley to talk a little more about Prequel and how exciting it is. It is actively kickstarting right now. They did reach their funding goal, but there are some really, really cool stretch goals to unlock, and that could be you. You could back this project. You could get a copy of this amazing game to kickstart your next campaign of whatever. This is system agnostic. You can put it in literally anywhere. We've seen so many amazing examples. The Discord server is buzzing for the Kickstarter. It is awesome. And so you should check it out. Go to tinyurl.com/TRR Prequel. That's tinyurl.com/TRR Prequel. Check out Prequel the game, back it on Kickstarter. It is coming out soon, and you will not regret it. And as always, thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting the show, and follow us on social media, wherever you find your social media, at The Roll Report Cast. And for that $1 a month or more, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/The Roll Report, and you could ask questions of our amazing upcoming guests. Back to the interview. So you mentioned trying to bring the mechanics into a game of doomed heroes to make it fun, and like I find if my GM is like, hey, you're all gonna die and that's the point, I'm like, cool, I'm gonna do something dumb. But what specific mechanics have you brought to the game that you feel like really play into, no, we're all gonna have a great time and we're gonna go out in a blaze of glory?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's like a big difference, especially when we talk about tabletop role-playing games, is that there's a lot of fun that we can create at the table outside of the mechanics. Like, especially, if we're great storytellers, or if you have a table that's, very theatrical, like they will find fun for themselves from whatever you give them. They will create their own, moments, on stage, and like own drama, even if you give them, just a single dice to roll. But like, I come from the thought of like, okay, I want to give those people tools to like tell the stories they want, but also like for people who maybe are more on like the mechanical or on the wargaming side, who like, oh, I actually get a lot of my enjoyment as a player from puzzles, or from like, from doing something with like the best skill I can, having, I want to make games that are fun for all different player archetypes.
I think one thing I want to clarify for just a moment is like, I think, I did not make this distinction in asking the question, but I think mechanics can apply both to narrative mechanics within game rules, that you're like, narratively, I created this bit so it prompts people to like describe their last move as they go out or whatever. And there are also like the crunchier, dice rolling mechanic or whatever rule might be that like, no, I don't know. I like didn't have quite the words, but I think those are both my sense has been those are both very much present in the game, but to aiding the narrative, aiding people in thinking of their amazing superhero landing that like sends a shockwave flying and then doesn't actually move the big bad, and the like, no, what does that actually mechanically do when I do my superhero landing and it doesn't work? Do I roll a dice? So it seems like both of these are contributing in the development of Prequel and in how it is played out.
Yeah, for sure. And like definitely, Prequel is a game that is like it's 50% a turn-based combat game and 50% a more open-ended, like open-ended almost like journaling game. Like and like there are people who love, open-ended, world building and journaling games, and there are people who love, complex tactical games, and having them like 50% of the time, like we don't want them to just like 50% of the time having a fun time, if 50% of them not. Like we want them to enjoy both sides of Prequel. But a lot of the challenge has been, it's like, okay, like how can we make the world building aspect, add some hooks to the world building aspect that adds to the experience of the wargaming players, and how do we add hooks into the wargaming aspect that add hooks to the bards?
Yeah, totally. In that way, I want to ask you maybe a difficult question that maybe is kind of impossible, but like, is there the 5-minute version of like, very roughly, this is the sequence of events that would happen in a Prequel game to and to lead into whatever the next campaign might be that GM and those players want to do? I don't know if that is an insane request. Sure. It might be totally impossible.
So I'll attack this by about like what the general like flow of the game is. So it's a game you're fighting kind of your final boss, and each player's you're piloting your own hero with your own abilities, and you take a turn doing something very familiar to people who play like D&D or like Pathfinder. You're using your abilities with ranges and damages to like hit the boss. And so your goal there is like, okay, I'm trying to bring down the boss, but after that kind of like tactical part resolves, you get to add to basically a timeline of the game. So you get to add events, you get to add, people, places, factions that basically make up the quest of the game up until that point. So you kind of like go back and forth between those two components, and eventually you're going to hit a point in the game where the heroes realize the boss is too strong, where, he ascends to a stronger form, and like there's this oh shit moment. Like a big like pull for this game was like the Exandria Unlimited like Calamity one shot, where it's like hey, like Satan himself has arisen, and like we're not killing a god. It's not happening. So we're doing the best we can. So the transition point is like a lot about, okay, like instead of winning the game means, okay, how much can we like learn and pull away from this fight for the future? So what is the legacy that we're leaving to that next adventuring party that will also be played by us? Yeah, exactly. So like what weaknesses does the villain have, and like what factions and other individuals or locations are we putting into the world that we can then pull on after this one shot ends and we all die horribly. Yeah. So, and just seeing if I've got it, and also seeing if I can think of a really fast example. If I was playing on my turn in that initial kind of half, I might say like, oh,
I'm gonna arbitrarily say I've like kind of got a paladin thing going on, so I'm gonna run in, like hit this guy with my sword. There's gonna be a giant smite, and I'm going to flash back to the special sword that I was given by this religious order that exists in our world that has been secretly anticipating the return of this evil deity forever. And I have this sword now, and I'm hoping that it will actually do all the damage. And I do the attack, and in a moment we're like, actually, it was just a fucking like piece of tin and it shatters into a million pieces. And this is when we start going, oh, fuck. We leave behind. Don't fucking trust that weird, shady cult. They might actually be on the side of this evil deity.
Yeah, or the fact that like, oh, well, now that like that sword is out there somewhere in the world. Like now me as a player, it's like, well, I actually didn't get to use the true sword in the fight. Now as my next character, like I'm going to build a little bit of a backstory where like as a kid, I read about that moment of the sword shattering and, I'm in a pursuit, to try and find where it actually is.
Yeah. Is there a clear guideline for like, okay, you play Prequel and then you want your campaign to start X number of days, weeks, months, years after, or is that a really like, no, what do we want? Because I could see both of these things being really fun. You're like, hey, the day after this legendary heroes fail is when we're starting, and so everything is going to get rapidly worse. Or the heroes failed 20 years ago, and the world has been terrible for 20 years, but now there's the beginnings of an uprising.
Before I say anything, like caveat, it's like, at your own table, do whatever you want.
Oh yeah, 100%.
How much time has passed since like the evil appears is like something we factor into the conclusion of the game. So like you can't kill the evil, but you can beat the shit out of him, So like, the more you damage the evil, the longer he's going to take to recover. And we also put it in, it's like, oh, okay, well, since the evil is not going to be back for a while, you get to, take more elements from the game as and basically like lock them in, as in like, oh, well, these factions and locations, since the evil didn't return right away, they were able to, bolster themselves. They were able to like, strengthen themselves and like be prepared for when the evil comes back. So kind of the better you do in the one shot, the more, friends and allies are ready when that evil comes back, and like more pieces you get to like try and, transition into a long-term campaign.
Absolutely. As you were building it, did you plan for like a specific system to happen afterwards, to be that campaign? So far it has sounded like Prequel is pretty system agnostic. Like you have your system for Prequel, and then it could go into whatever kind of long form campaign you want, depending on the setting of your Prequel game. But did you have an intention when you were creating it?
We kept it keeping things pretty agnostic. As long as it's something that's vaguely fantasy, and I think also part of it is like, you're kind of building a world with Prequel. So maybe you do a Prequel session and you do like a really high fantasy, type of world. A game like D&D might be like good for that, but maybe you do something that's like maybe more grittier and more like dark, like maybe something like, Shadow Dark will be, more of a connection. So we definitely don't want to be like prescriptive for people.
Totally. Were there any things that, trying to think of the right way to phrase this. I'm curious if there are things that you guys put in initially that as you've developed and play tested, you were just like, oh my God, that was a terrible idea. What were we thinking? And also the converse, if there's something like from version 0.1 to now has just been like, that was a great idea. We might have had to tweak it, but like the whole time that has been a core part of the game.
One big thing, like, and it was very much like my intent with like in coming into like develop Prequel. I went to Ethan. I'm like, hey, like, I really want to make this like a very like testing and player focused development. So like part of our development plan was we want to get a playable version of this game as fast as possible and put it in front of players. Like, so within like the first month and a half, we had a playable version of the game, and we sat down with, some friends who had never seen it before, and we had them play it. That play test did not go great. It was very rickety, and there was a lot of things where like people were like, it's like, oh, well, there's this action where like I have to move one and do one damage. Do I have to move first, or can I do the damage first and then move? And we're like, that sounds right.
Sure.
Yeah, for sure. But like the biggest thing, kind of talking back of like, making sure that both halves of the game feel resonant is that we were kind of like, oh yeah, like you're gonna make this timeline, and you're going to have this combat, and then at the end of it, the combat's gonna be fun and the timeline's gonna be fun. And we ran the session, and we're like, players were basically said like, hey, yeah, that was cool, but like it didn't feel like anything had to do with each other, like it's like it's either spent like if the game is decided about whether like I hit this guy enough, why do I care about building a timeline? Yeah. And I'm like, and we were like, oh yeah, okay. So you want, and it's not that they didn't have fun building the timeline. It's that like, hey, like we're spending 10 minutes here, like thinking up a really cool event and like factions to add to this timeline, but all like without any connection. It's like, it doesn't matter whether I come up with something cool or I come up with something lame. The one damage on my sword is going to be one damage on my sword.
Yeah. It occurs to me that some of that, I obviously mechanically you guys have addressed this, but I think it sounds like part of it is in the GM's approach to it, in a sense, explaining what's going on, right? It's hey, party, here's your job. You're going to fight this thing. You're going to fail, and we're going to set up the whole story. Versus, I can just imagine like early on in development, it's kind of like, here's this giant thing, guys. Your job is to hit it and build this timeline, and just not quite have the language fully formed to be like, all of this does matter and all of this is important. And also later, mechanically, it all interweaves a little bit more. Or that is kind of the way it is sounding to me. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, for
sure. Like, I mean, it was definitely like, it was a lot of like, hey, how players, like, there's a lot of things that players enjoy, but like, how do we add the mechanical, duct tape around the edges to make everything feel like cohesive together?
Duct tape and dental floss holds everything together. Yeah, totally. As the playtesting went on, did any of those groups, either that you were running or observing, did anyone take their world building in a really weird and unexpected direction? It seems like it's part of the point is to be very open-ended and allow, obviously with some consensus at the table, but to really say like, no, we want to create the weirdest, most insane, amazing story that we can up to this point, so we have a lot to build on.
I think I've had, in talking about attitudes, I think I've had things go with like two directions. Whether, players are creating the most, dramatic, moments with characters, like with deep connections between them, like, or like there, there's a lot of joke moments. Granted, I don't think those two things are mutually exclusive. I had
absolutely,
one playtest where someone, they couldn't think of something, or they were just like trying to get through their turn. They're like, okay, I need to just create somebody here. It's like, okay, I'm going to make Stinky the Goblin. And then later down the line, especially since we have these we have a mechanic that basically are like mini achievements that you fill out in the game that like, hey, like if you kind of basically create this like narrative loop, like you have like you create a character that's like a mentor, and then you create an event where like halfway through the timeline they're killed off, and that inspires you.
Yeah.
You get this achievement, and you also like make that, that classic Obi-Wan Kenobi story beat happen. So this
could be
someone's like, it's like, okay, well, I need like an ally who like we met along the journey who will like sacrifice themselves for us. And he's like, Stinky.
Stinky the Goblin. That dude would sacrifice himself.
He threw away his family, and then he got arrested by the police.
Wow. I mean, I absolutely had a game going for a long time where the lone survivor of a goblin raid on a caravan became the party's bard over time. Although I was like, are you sure? He's a bad bard. He's a goblin. His charisma is bad. Okay.
He'll get better.
And then he was very slowly. Anyway, long story about Jeffrey the Goblin and how it's one of the ones I made the mistake of doing a dumb voice that everyone loved.
If you slam the square peg in the round hole, eventually it will break and it will go through.
Yep. Or the square starts turning around. You just get like a little slivers of wood popping out everywhere. Like, that's fine. Right. But prequel, the reason we're here. I don't know. I'm feeling slightly tongue tied because I'm excited about it. And I feel like there are so many different interesting angles on it. But I guess to focus on the current, Kickstarter is going, things are happening. What are kind of the next immediate steps, and when can people get the game in their hands? Because I want to play before my next campaign.
So you can actually play the game now without even backing. You don't have to back the campaign. There is a fully playable preview version of the game out now on, you can follow whatever link and it'll, and you can find an adjoined connection to that. So there's no barrier to playing Prequel. If this game sounds cool, go fucking play it. I don't care if you take my money. What's up? If you want the game to be better and like let us add, more art, add more characters that we're super psyched to add more villains to, beat up and fight, then you can back the campaign. I've got a evil that I'm adding called the Horror. So if you want to have a prequel session that also like brings in a lot of like supernatural and like mystery elements and like build, a lot of like mysteries into your world before you start your campaign, then back the project. And the campaign will go until the 16th.
16th. So not a ton of time left to get in, but get in there because it's going to be really good. Something I was thinking about this earlier, and what you said about mysteries reminded me. I feel like there's a way this would actually be like a really interesting setup for Call of Cthulhu, or like one of those very like Lovecraft inspired cosmic horror and madness insanity mechanic kind of games, because you're in your prequel you're like, oh, we are unleashing this horror on the world because we failed, we didn't have enough knowledge, we didn't do XYZ thing. I really want to commend both you and Ethan on like doing this in a way that it really feels like you can use it to set up any kind of game that you're doing after in any sort of like whatever system. It's not easy to do.
I think like one of the like big barriers, especially when like you're starting off like a new long-term campaign, is I think like, doing this type of thing, like having this dramatic moment and like all of this, whether it's like, oh, like I want to do some pre-episode that's like set in the world and has like a lot going on with it. Either it's like, oh, like some great war or something else like you like there's nothing stopping you doing that with any of your games at home. But like if you're the GM, you're in for probably like 20 hours of prep work that you're gonna mostly have to throw away at the end, as you reset forward like 20 years. And I'm really happy that like with Prequel we're able to give you experience to like have an opportunity of telling something that feels very dramatic but like also doesn't require you to do a lot of work.
Something I talk about a lot and is very important to me is collaborative storytelling, right? It is the idea that we all have to buy in and we are all creating this together. Sure, in a campaign sense, your DM or GM is in the driver's seat. They are the ones kind of like laying the track down, but everybody's got to build the train as we go along. And if anyone wants to jump off, then like the whole thing can derail. And this is like high up there with a few other games is like really genuinely collaborative. Someone has to shape a little bit and someone has to play the horror, play the big bad, but everyone has to be creating this scene and creating the history of it together. And I think that is both really valuable. Again, as you're saying, DM has to do a little bit less work because everyone's on the team. And also, I think that is like one of the coolest things about RPGs as a whole is telling stories with your friends. And this really makes everyone part of that team. So yeah, I love that. I think that's really cool. Wow. I guess the thing that I want to maybe close out with is like, what have we not covered something? Is there like something about Prequel that you were like really excited about that I didn't quite ask? Like, I don't know. Open floor.
Open floor.
For open floor for Prequel thoughts. I was like going back and seeing if there were like other specific notes or questions I had, and I kind of the things that I had, I think we kind of talked about, but like, yeah, I'm excited, and as the creator, if there are more things that we were excited about, like, I want to make sure that we talk about.
I'll talk about something I'm super excited about for this game.
Yeah.
I personally get a sentiment that especially like in D&D spheres and like in D&D spheres and like with actual play, that's like I'm an amazing actual play watcher. I love all of these amazing different stories, and I love the drama and the performance that comes from it. And I think from this, like, there's built up a little bit of narrative that, like, hey, the drama and the acting of the game is a large or like can be like the biggest part of the game. And I think that's great. And I completely agree it has its place. But like you also have some people who basically say it's like, okay, from that end, let's subtract as many elements of these maybe more tactical games to get to that point. Like combat is something that's like we roll our eyes at and we eat like our medicine. And it's like, okay, like as much as we can like subtract from, the combat in D&D or other systems, the more we can get to the actual fun stuff. And like, I think like a big point for me on Prequel was, okay, I really want to make a combat that's fun. And I really want to like show it's like, like I think you can very much make a tactical combat that's fun and enjoying. And you get, every time you get to your turn, you're excited about the options you have and what you need to do. And you feel engaged. Not that, oh, I'm just going to hit the guy for the, 6th time in a row. So I'm personally on a little bit of a mission with the game to like combat in tabletop RPGs isn't boring. We just need to do a better job at like making it engaging and fun and making a better puzzle for people to toy with.
Yeah. Actually, let me ask this question quick. It hasn't sounded like prequel is dice based almost at all. Is there a die involved?
There's no like,
or
there's no dice rolling outside of one simple mechanic inside the game.
Yeah.
It is a game about like your stats are resources, and you're mostly spending them to do different things.
And so I think that I would say that I think that helps a lot. You know, I think I do think 5th edition D&D and Pathfinder and several other systems that I'm like passingly or somewhat familiar with, we are getting to a point of simplifying things. But still, the way they approach combat of everyone needing to take a turn and everyone having all these abilities and things you do, you have to know the mechanics and rules. And then frequently you have to roll a bunch of dice and do basic math. Versus what I would call a very narrative approach, which I think Prequel is taking, that you have these, you know, you're going to have a sheet, you have these resources, but you're like, I just cross off one of those to do the thing, and then it's all about me describing the thing that I'm doing. Versus, hey, am I far enough away? Am I in range of this spell? Can I in fact hit him with my sword? If I run in there, can I run away? You know what I mean? And my sense has been that Prequel has hand-waved some of this, because I think those mechanics, again, if I'm wrong, please say, like, those mechanics are less important to Prequel and maybe to you and Ethan than telling a good story and having a good time. And you have made mechanics that are in service of those rather than math.
I think it's not a crunchy game, but I think like that, like we do have ranges, we do have things that you have to like, you know, consider in like using your abilities. Like my biggest thing is like if they're like, when you have an ability, I want it to feel like, you know, like a really cool moment and a really cool choice, right? So like we have a class in the game, for example, called the Bulwark, which is like, you know, a big, you know, tanky guy. Texturally, where like they have an ability where they charge, you know, and now in D&D, there's like a charge feat, and like, okay, if you move a little bit, you get to do an extra damage. Versus like in Prequel, like the charge lets you move like a rook piece across the board all the way until you hit somebody, and then you get to do damage based off of how far you moved.
Awesome.
So one, it's the challenge of, okay, I want to hit someone and charge them as far away as possible, but I also need to go in a straight line to do it.
Right.
So it's like both the payoff is real. The payoff is like very interesting. And it also gives you an interesting choice where it's like, okay, now I really have to think about how I'm charging, or I need, hey, like my friend who has the ability to like make me reposition me, can you set me up so I can do my awesome charge? So like we're very much like, it's like, no, like it is tactical, but we want to make that payoff feel really satisfying.
Yeah. I want to ask about one thing you just said, which is just kind of having your friends assist you, and if there are some built-in mechanics to do that. Like, you know, again, if you think about D&D, it's this weird crunchy, like, can I use the help action on my turn? Do I have to hold my action to wait for this person? Can I use a reaction? And instead, do you have does Prequel have a better system of just like, yeah, my friend can reposition me so we can talk to each other and set up the next like 2 moves that we're doing at the same time?
I mean, we've designed Prequel with a lot of intent of every character has different abilities. And we really want to encourage different moments that let those play off of each other. So, you know, we have a character that's a character called the Crooked, and, you know, he can swap 2 players' positions or swap a position of an enemy or an ally. And we have, another character that like can shoot in a straight line, but like really wants to like stay like not move on their turn. So if you swap them over to a place where they can get their shot and swap them back, then you're playing off of each other. And we very much want Prequel to feel like a puzzle.
Yeah. I love it. Like a fun, like 3-dimensional collaborative storytelling puzzle. Oh, we want more games like this. I want more games like this. I'll say we. Who knows? I guess on that note, to the extremely most important questions of the interview, as they always are. James, what is your favorite character class?
In
D&D or otherwise, as it might be.
In D&D, I'm a big rogue enjoyer. I love a good rogue. I think that partially because rogues don't need like a whole lot. Like it's like as long as you have like high dexterity, you're a rogue. But like I can take the intelligence up, and like I can be, maybe more of like I steal magical secrets, and like maybe I'm more of like a magical rogue. I can take the charisma up and be like, I'm more of like a flamboyant, duelist. I can take the strength up and be like, no, I'm kind of like a criminal muscle. I love that, like, I can kind of like direct things in different ways very easily. Yeah.
It's a very loose archetype that can be put on a bunch of different kind of classical characters that as you can think of. Yeah, 100%. I really love the idea, now that you've said it, of like the muscly rogue who actually is like surprisingly low dexterity, and you're like, hide in the shadows. And they just kind of like loom menacingly in the background, vaguely out of sight, but definitely just come in and bruise. Yeah. I gotta say, I think Rogue is definitely like up there, if not actively winning amongst the all of the class and up the joints so far. Definitely very, very prominently mentioned, which I think speaks to the versatility and like how many of us are like, yeah, I want to sneak around and stab someone. That sounds great.
And I think like,
what does that say about us?
You see that. I think you see this with Rogue most of all, but like you also, druids like can also do this, where you have the thieves' cant and like the druidic speech. It's like, oh no, I want like a type of communication, or like some way to look at the world for information that like is special to my class and like how I see things.
Yeah. And something I've talked about a couple times is how things like a cleric and a warlock and even a paladin, you have an immediate connection to the supernatural, right? You have to have a patron or a deity and something for your DM to kind of bring in that aspect of the world. And a rogue, you could immediately have a connection to the criminal element and whatever is happening kind of under surface level politics and whatever's on the street of cities and towns that you might come into. By virtue of thieves' cant and like depending on the background you choose, kind of having a reputation as it might be. Well, A plus, definitely one of my favorites. Always happy to see more Rogue fans. Favorite subclass or classes?
Favorite subclass in terms of Rogue, Thief is my favorite subclass.
In terms of any, like I would say that people have definitely said like, oh, my Rogue is my favorite, but actually I utterly in love Shadow Sorcerer. Thief is a lot of fun. I actually think that kind of the new version got a nice little boost as far as Thief Rogue specifically. But yes, class agnostic, is there just like the subclass you're like, that is the coolest fucking thing ever for unreasonable reasons?
What's up? I was a big fan of this is a bit off, but there was an alternative like Artificer that got released back in the day, third party. I forget the YouTube channel, and I'm not gonna massacre it now. But basically it kind of opened up the subclass, and you could like you got like innovation points to like spend on building different things. So like you could like, add like alchemy, you could like build like magical, guns, or you could armor, or spend it just like regularly on like magic items. And like, I really liked I think that it captured really well the feeling of like, oh no, I'm an artificer, so I don't really want, I don't want to feel, I don't want to feel constrained by my subclass. I just want to like be building all different things, and like, if I can build it, I can build it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I'm gonna put a little effort into finding that, because that sounds super cool.
I can link it afterwards.
Yeah, totally. I like, my very casual look around was like, I don't know if it came from A5e Level Up or something else. Because I know, any number of amazing third-party content has and will continue to come out that is improvements, especially as we've kind of touched on the 2024 updates being a bit of a mixed bag, let's call it, for a number of classes. Well, yeah, okay. That we'll find that. That will be in the show notes. And the important thing, links to Prequel, links to the Kickstart, both the Kickstarter and the quick start of Prequel are all going to be in the show notes. Check out Prequel, everybody. It is super, super cool. Can't wait to actually get to integrate it into one of my campaigns. I have a feeling my players are going to be very, very excited to like go full on kaiju destroying at some point soon. James, thank you so much for joining us and giving us the download on Prequel. Where can people find you on the internet, or other games and systems that you worked on that we may have talked about?
Thank you so much for, giving me the space and taking the time, Colin. You can find me, you can Google Quigjam, Quigjam. I'm Quigjam on pretty much everything. Itch, Twitter, Blue Sky, YouTube. Find my stuff. Follow what's going on.
Yeah. And there's a few days left of this Kickstarter. Help bring Prequel to life. It is absolutely super cool and worth it. And I don't know that I have more to say. I'm so excited for this to be out. Congratulations on bringing a year-long development to a successful release. And thank you again for joining us. What a treat to get to chat with you again.
Thank you so much. It's been a blast.